to begin.
Go for it, Deb.
I'm sorry. Good morning. Welcome everyone to the 2022 annual meeting of the Metropolitan Area Planning, or the MAP Forum. I'm Deb Nelson of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, and I'm joined by my colleague Gerry Bogacz of NYMTC, and it is our pleasure to host this year's annual meeting. Today's meeting is going to focus on many regional planning issues, as well as the implementation of the Federal Infrastructure Act. We are pleased to have Mitch Warren, the Executive Director of the Northeast Corridor Commission, as our keynote speaker. And we're also pleased to have a presentation on the MTA's Central Business District Tolling Program, which is a very significant regional project. Before we dive into the meeting, though, I'd like to hand it over to Gerry Bogacz to handle some of the organizational housekeeping issues. Gerry?
Thank you, Deb. Good morning, everyone. First, we want to do a roll call of the MAP Forum members to see who is with us. So the Connecticut Metropolitan Council of Governments, I believe I saw Devin Clark. Devin, you here?
I am. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. For Capital Region Council of Governments, I think I saw Roger Cron.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Roger Cron from Prague.
Good morning, Roger. Thank you for being with us. Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, I know I saw Becky Bradley.
I'm here.
Okay. And is there anyone on from the Lower Connecticut River Valley Council of Governments? I'm not sure I saw anybody from Rivercog. Okay, moving on. Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments. I know I saw Rick Dunn and several others.
I am here, Gerry, with the sun shining.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's I can't get it out of my camera, so.
Oh my God, that's wonderful. You look dramatic. And I know Mark Nielsen is also on, correct, Mark?
Yeah, good morning. Mark Nielsen, NVCOG.
Okay. From the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, we have myself and Deb Nelson. North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. Dave?
Morning, everybody. Dave Barron.
Okay. Welcome, Dave. Orange County Transportation Council. I think I saw Alan Sorensen.
Yeah, Gerry, I'm on, and I'm also joined by Lauren Bennett, Senior Transportation Planner, and Raina Tawil.
Greetings, folks. South Central Regional Council of Governments.
Yes, we're here, Carl Amento and Jim Rode.
Good morning, Carl. Good morning, Jim. Thank you for joining us. And finally, the Western Connecticut Council of Governments. Francis, I thought I saw you on.
Yes, I am here. Thank you, Gerry.
Great. Thank you. All right, so we have everybody but Rivercog, so that's a good turnout. Thank you so much. We'll now move into our main presentations for today's meeting. I'm going to ask Dave Barron of NJTPA to introduce our keynote speaker. Dave.
Okay, thanks, Gerry. Everybody can hear me, right?
Yes, you're great.
Yeah, I'm pleased to introduce Mitch Warren, the Executive Director of the Northeast Corridor Commission. Earlier this year, Mitch was kind enough to speak at one of our board meetings on what's going on with the Northeast Corridor, what's going on with the commission, sort of the long-term outlook for the corridor. And I think at a meeting of the MAP Forum, we thought that it would be a great idea for him to speak to the forum, because so many of our MPO regions are home to the corridor, are affected by the corridor, and it's such an important part of our regional economy. And so he was again kind enough to agree to come join us this morning. So just real quickly, Mitch has been the Executive Director of the Northeast Corridor Commission since 2011. And prior to that, he was Senior Policy Advisor for the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. So with that, please welcome Mitch Warren from the Northeast Corridor Commission.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. I appreciate you having me join you today. It's certainly an exciting time for the passenger rail industry with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. An industry that's been starved for money for many decades finally has some coming. So I'll give just a quick background on the corridor and the commission, and then talk about some of the planning that we're currently doing and the infrastructure bill that passed and what that means. I like to introduce, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the Northeast Corridor, but I like to highlight to folks how busy, important, complicated, and old it is. Some of these stats are pre-COVID from 2019, but we have a corridor carrying over 800,000 daily passengers, again, pre-COVID, on over 2,000 trains operated by 8 different commuter railroads, Amtrak, and also a number of freight railroads operate on the corridor. And all of that takes place on track owned by 4 different entities on infrastructure that was mostly built between the Civil War and World War II. And much of it is no longer in a state of good repair. So the challenge that the region and the nation was facing was we had a very important corridor, a lot of different stakeholders, high level of complexity, and aging infrastructure. So Congress created the Northeast Corridor Commission to bring together some of the key stakeholders. So we have 9 members representing the states, including the District of Columbia up through Massachusetts. Kevin Corbett, head of New Jersey Transit, is our state co-chair. From this region, Jana Lieber, Joe Giletti are also very involved, highly engaged in all the work that's going on. From the federal side, we have the U.S. Department of Transportation has 5 members appointed by the Secretary of Transportation. Amit Bose, the head of the FRA, is our federal co-chair. Both he and Polly Trottenberg previously served on the commission under the Obama administration, and we're thrilled to have them rejoining us. And then Amtrak, we have 4 members. Stephen Gardner, the CEO, leads the Amtrak delegation. He actually is one of the original commission members from back when we had our first meeting in late 2010. So we spent our first number of years that we were, after we were created, had, like I mentioned, our first meeting in late 2010. We were charged by Congress with developing a formula for allocating costs on the corridor. So we spent a number of years in pretty intense negotiations developing what became a cost allocation policy, where we share over $1.3 billion a year in shared operating and normalized replacement capital costs. And the policy really has 3 core pillars. There's the cost sharing, which is that $1.3 billion. Since a lot of the states and commuter railroads were going to be paying a lot more as a result of this cost sharing, they wanted to make sure that there was more collaboration on the corridor, shared decision making, and more transparency and accountability. So we've attempted to do that. We set up through the policy a 5-year plan that we develop, an annual report that we do to look at how things are going. That brings a lot of transparency and accountability. We also, our members wanted a federal partnership. Again, if the states and commuter railroads are going to be investing more in the corridor, they wanted the federal government to be a better partner and help to particularly address the state of good repair backlog. And we'll see that really has, with the infrastructure bill, the federal partnership really has expanded significantly. These are our 3 major products that we work on. The Connect NEC program is something that I'll talk a little bit more about. That's relatively new, a 15-year plan that we do. The capital investment plan are 5-year plans that we do, working with Amtrak and our state and commuter agencies to make sure that we have a coordinated plan that we can show what could be done if there was funding. And then the annual report is holding everyone accountable for implementing the first year of the 5-year plan. And all of these reports are available on our website. You can see the address here. I encourage you to take a look at them. The annual report looks at both delivery of the first year of the capital program and there's been a lot of challenges in that, and we talk about that in the annual report, and it looks at on-time performance, trends there, and ridership as well. The Connect NEC program is something that we began before we knew there was going to be an infrastructure bill. It was very fortuitous timing. We spent a couple of years working with all of our members trying to develop a regional plan that incorporated both the inner city priorities that Amtrak has with the commuter priorities that many of the transit agencies in the states have. And, you know, we focused in addition on making sure that all of the corridor's needs were addressed. We really focused on state of good repair, and we didn't constrain it by workforce or funding, but we did constrain it by track outage requirements, which is a significant constraint in the corridor. You know, I think, as you're all aware, it's a busy corridor, and you take a track out of service and it has significant impacts on on-time performance. You often need to cancel trains. So we spent a lot of time doing a delivery analysis, trying to maximize our the productivity of every track outage, given the need to get a lot of work done because of the age of the corridor and the difficulty in getting track time. So we had a press conference at Moynihan Train Hall in July 2021 with our members representing the states, Amtrak, and USDOT, and we put out what we called C35, Connect NEC 2035, and got a very good reception. And it was well-timed because it gave Congress and the administration, as they were negotiating the infrastructure bill, important information about the needs of the corridor and confidence that the corridor was working together, that the states and Amtrak were coordinating and you know, had a real plan for improving the corridor. So I think it really made a difference in helping us get more money through the infrastructure bill. Right now, I mentioned we finished C35 in July of 2021. We released it. For the first year, we worked on a C35 update, and that's because the infrastructure bill created well, it didn't create it. It amended an existing federal state partnership program, which gave grants previously in fairly small dollar amounts for state good repair rail projects. And with the infrastructure bill, they put $24 billion for the Northeast Corridor into that program, and asked FRA to develop a project inventory, which would be the basis for making decisions on where that money is going to be awarded. And the project inventory was to be based on the C35 plan. So since the C35 plan didn't take workforce limitations into account, we did an update on it to try and give Federal Railroad Administration the most up-to-date information possible. So we updated them on project readiness, what projects really are going to be ready to go forward. And that's a continuing work in progress, but we gave them the best update we could. We took a first look at some of the limitations on workforce. To get all this work done, we're going to need a lot more workers, and that's going to take time. It's going to take years to ramp up, and we tried to begin to show what that would entail, and that does reduce what can be accomplished. In C37, which we've now begun, and that we're going to release next fall, we're going to take a deep dive into project readiness, into workforce constraints, continue to look closely at track outage constraints. We do delivery analyses. So every time we do a new iteration of this plan, it's getting better and better. And again, when we did C35, it was more of a wish list. There was no funding available. C37, there's real funding available. Not enough to fund the whole plan. C35 was a $117 billion plan over 15 years. The infrastructure bill has $24 billion through the Fed State Partnership Program. Amtrak got $6 billion for its Northeast Corridor account. And then there's some other programs. In fact, the next slide has a summary of some of these programs. The I mentioned the Fed State program, that's 24 billion. The NEC account 6 billion. The CRISI program, we're hoping that we can get some money to help the corridor from that too. That was 5 billion. Plus, there's annual appropriations for each of these, which will help. Obviously, these are still a far cry from 117 billion, but a huge step forward for the corridor. And then there's some other programs like FTA's Capital Investment Grant Program, and that's funding the Portal Bridge. It's going to fund at least a good part of the Hudson Tunnel project. There's the MEGA program that was created in the infrastructure bill, the RAISE grants, which will be smaller amounts of money, but all other opportunities to try and bring some money to advance the Connect NEC plans on the corridor. So just last week, I think, maybe it was the week before, FRA put out their project inventory. And they created 2 buckets. The first bucket was major backlog projects. And here's a list of all the major backlog projects. You can see the first group are projects that are either in construction or going to begin construction by 2024. And those projects are going to, we think, get a funding guarantee, phase funding agreements, so they can get started knowing that the funding's there over, even if the project may take 5-10 years to complete, that the funding is there to get it done. And then there's additional projects that aren't going to be ready for construction by 2024, but can get started with pre-construction dollars to keep them moving through the project development pipeline. The second bucket of projects was all the other projects: capital renewal projects, stations projects, improvement projects. They identified 2 projects that have a strong degree of project readiness and are ready to move forward: Penn Station Access, the Mid-Atlantic program, the overhead contact system replacement program, and the Harrisburg line in Pennsylvania. And then there's a whole list of other projects, a number of them in Connecticut and New Jersey and states across the corridor that are, at least at this point, we're hoping to have ready for construction by 2024. So we'll have to, going forward, figure out how do we move all these projects forward, given that there's not enough money for all of them. So that's a big challenge that we're going to have to work on with our members, with the administration, with Congress. And this last slide I have before we go to questions is just implementing all of this is going to be a big challenge. The corridor has been starved for money for many, many decades. And suddenly there's a lot out there. And Amtrak is in the process of hiring thousands of people to really ramp up construction. And this is both on the labor side and the management side. So workforce is a big challenge, and everybody needs to ramp up there. And that's going to be a big challenge in getting started and moving these projects as quickly as possible. Agreements are often a challenge. These can be cost sharing agreements, liability agreements, many other agreements that need to be negotiated between parties. We're trying to figure out how we can keep those from delaying the process and maybe standardize those so we can get them done quicker. And then there's going to be a lot of coordination needed. Again, the focus on track outages is really important, and we need to keep projects on time, on schedule, on budget, so that they hit the track outages, because we're trying to plan those well in advance so that you can do multiple things during a track outage. So you don't do, in the past, Amtrak could do a track outage for track work, and then a couple years later, the commuter agency is going to need to do some platform work, and the same track will be taken out. Then Amtrak will have to do signal work, and you'll take it out again. So when we have the track outage, let's do everything that we can possibly do. So we have an implementation working group that's trying to figure out what the commission can do to help move these forward. Amtrak is doing a lot of internal work and restructuring to get ready for this. USDOT and the Federal Railroad Administration are looking at how they can be helpful. Obviously all of our state members and transit agencies are trying to figure out how to move projects forward. So got a big challenge ahead of us. but it's an exciting time. Finally, some money flowing. The corridor's an incredibly important resource, an economic resource, a transportation resource, and we got to get these projects moving forward to make the trains more reliable, allow where needed more frequency, and we also will be getting some trip time improvements out of this as well. So with that, that's a background on all the work that's going on. Happy to answer questions.
Mr. Warren, thank you very much. It is an important corridor, that's for sure. We'll be entertaining questions first from the map forum members who are panelists. You can just unmute and ask your questions. And then we only have a couple of minutes, but time permitting, if there's anything from the audience, Stephanie Brooks is monitoring the chat pod, so you can enter your questions into the chat pod. So starting with the map forum members who are panelists, any questions from Mr. Warren?
Gerry, this is Mark Nielsen and VCOG. Just one quick question. I know the presentation, I know most of the funding is for infrastructure improvements. Is there any, are you looking at the rail equipment that operates on the line, or is that still going to remain sort of in the purview of the operators of the service?
Yeah, the equipment is not something we're looking at. We're focused on shared infrastructure.
Right. Okay.
So the equipment is more, Amtrak obviously has lots of plans. They're bringing on new Acela trains. They're looking to replace the regional trains, and I know some of the commuter agencies are looking at new equipment, but that's not something that we've been involved in.
Okay. And then the other question too is it focused on sort of the main elements of the track. What about the branch lines and any suggested improvements along those, or again, is that going to be sort of the responsibility of the owners?
The two branch lines that are in the commission's purview are the Springfield line, New Haven, Hartford, Springfield, and the Harrisburg line from Philadelphia to Harrisburg. So those are part of the plans. So there's a number of projects to improve the Harrisburg line, a number of projects to improve the Springfield line, and certainly in the Northeast, there's other both intercity and commuter lines that are important. The commission is not involved in the planning process for those lines, but I know that with some of the infrastructure bill money, Amtrak and the transit agencies are looking at improvements for other lines as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Any other questions from the map forum members who are panelists? Okay, Stephanie, any questions from the audience?
Not as of yet.
Okay, great. Mr. Warren, thank you so much for being with us today. Feel free to stay on if you'd like to see the rest of the meeting. But if not, we really appreciate your time and that very critical information to our multi-state region. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, appreciate you having me.
Sure. And I want to turn it over now to my colleague, Deb Nelson, for the next agenda item. Deb.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Gerry. We're now ready to move on to our regional issues portion of the meeting. We're very pleased to have with us Allison C. Cerreño of the MTA. Allison's the Deputy Chief Operating Officer for the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and she's MTA's project lead for the Central Business District Tolling Program. We're always happy to see you, Allison, and to hear what the latest happenings are with the CBD tolling program. It's obviously a project that has regional implications and has garnered an awful lot of interest. So we're very pleased to be able to hear from you today. And like we did with Mr. Warren's presentation, we will be entertaining questions from the MAP forum members. And if time permits, we will take some questions from the audience via the chat pod. So Allison, take it away. We're happy to hear what you have the latest status. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. One moment, please. All right, can everyone see this? I just want to make sure. Oh. Is it sharing now? Okay, I think it's sharing.
You're good, yes.
All right, excellent. So thank you, Deb. Thank you. I want to thank Gerry and Deb for the invitation today, and thank all of you who are participating. Really appreciate the invitation and the time that you're all giving to be here this morning. So as Deb said, I'm Allison de Cerreño. I'm the Deputy Chief Operating Officer for MTA, and I'm also lead on the Central Business District Tolling Program, otherwise known as congestion pricing. Today, I'm going to walk you through a brief presentation on why we're proposing to implement the program, the progress on the federal environmental review process, and where the project currently stands. Okay, so what is the Central Business District Tolling Program? So in 2019, the New York State legislature and governor enacted the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act, authorizing the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, also known as MTA Bridges and Tunnels, to design, develop, and implement a vehicular tolling system to reduce traffic congestion in the Manhattan Central Business District. As defined by the Act, vehicles would be charged daily for entering or remaining in the Manhattan Central Business District, which you can see here on the right in orange. It excludes the roadways that ring the island, or that portion of the island in dark red. Notably, as you see here, the FDR Drive and the West Side Highway, as well as the Battery Park Underpass and a couple of the small surface roadways that connect the tunnel and West Street. After covering the project-related capital and operating costs, the revenue collected would fund projects in the MTA's 2020 to 2024 capital program and successor capital programs. And specifically, 80% of those net revenues would be devoted to New York City Transit investments and 10% each for Metro North Railroad and Long Island Railroad investments. So New York City consistently ranks among the worst cities, not just in the United States, but in the world with respect to traffic congestion. Every year, drivers lose over 100 hours of time and spend nearly $1,600 just as a result of congestion. Between 2010 and 2019, the travel speeds in the Central Business District fell by over 20%. Local bus speeds have declined nearly 30%. So we definitely need this in terms of reducing congestion. And it's not a new program. For those of you who have been in the field for a while, the interest in congestion pricing goes well back to the late 2000s, 2007, 2008, with then Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And there have been subsequent attempts at making this happen since then. At the same time, we also need funding for MTA's capital program. To say that transit is the lifeblood of New York City is an understatement, and it moves every day in and out millions of people. We have 75% of just work trips coming into the CBD come in through the transit system. Excuse me, all trips, 85% of work trips. It is how we move in New York. So the funds are needed. We need, though, a new source of local recurring funding. So the benefits of the program would be reduced vehicular traffic in and near the Central Business District, improved travel times within the CBD, including for buses and deliveries and everyone else who's moving around. A new local source of recurring capital funding for subways, trains, and buses, and improved regional air quality. So the EA. Some of the roadways in the Manhattan Central Business District have received federal funding, so approval for tolling is needed from the Federal Highway Administration. And as many of you know, before a federal agency makes a decision, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, requires the federal agency to understand and disclose the environmental effects of that action, in this case, the authority to toll. An EA, or environmental assessment, is performed to ensure federal agencies consider those environmental impacts in the decision-making process. For proposed action that is not likely to have significant effects, or when the significance of the effect is unknown, the environmental assessment aids in determining the significance of those potential adverse effects. In March of last year, as federal lead agency, FHWA determined that an environmental assessment would be the appropriate class of action for this project. And recognizing that there might be effects on environmental justice populations, in particular because our region is so dense, frankly, with environmental justice populations. FHWA and the project sponsors incorporated enhanced public outreach and coordination with federal and state resource agencies. So in the environmental assessment, there are two alternatives. There's a no action alternative where we wouldn't do the program at all. And there's the action alternative that we refer to as the Central Business District or CBD tolling alternative, where we would implement the tolling program consistent with the Mobility Act to toll the vehicles entering or remaining in the Manhattan CBD, install the tolling infrastructure, system equipment, and signage within and near the Manhattan CBD, and then generate the funds for MTA capital investments. Just to give you a sense, the EA includes a broad study area or regional study area of 28 counties, including counties in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. You can see here on the left, those 28 counties. And this is an image that shows where the commuters are coming from. So of the 1.3 roughly region-wide commuters to the CBD, you can see shaded here each of the counties from which they come. In addition, you can actually see how they come, whether they come by transit, the T or C for car, or some other means of travel. And the most important sort of takeaway from this is, and no surprise, the closer you are, the more of a proportion or the higher proportional share of the commuters are represented. The further out the counties are, the lower that share. So those areas that are in the outer ring, Dutchess, Putnam, New Haven, Orange, Sussex, Hunterdon, and a couple of the others in Jersey, you can see they contribute fewer than 1% of the regular commuters that are coming to the CBD. Compared with, as you get closer in, Manhattan, Northern Manhattan, Queens, or Brooklyn, where you see upwards of 17%, 22%. And then places like the Bronx, where you're at 8%, Nassau, where you're at 6%, and then the ring a little bit further out, you can see Westchester at 5%, Bergen at 4%. As you go through the EA, we have different study areas or local study areas as well, depending upon what the particular topic is and where the effects might be felt. It was thought that the 28 county area made sense because this is really the catchment area for the commuters. On the right here, and also importantly, as I mentioned before, 85% of the people coming into the CBD already come by transit. But given the sheer volumes we're talking about, that 11% by car is still a hefty number of vehicles coming in every day. Again, you can see on the figure here to the right, of the 11% who are driving in by car, the majority of them are still coming from New York. 8% of them are actually coming from the New York counties. It's actually a shade under 3% come from New Jersey, and a very small portion come from Connecticut. In terms of the environmental assessment, these are all the areas that are addressed in the document. The little numbers that are here on the right of each of the areas is the chapter in which you can find them. Many of you, I'm sure, have actually taken a look at the environmental assessment. It was released for public comment in August, and we held our hearings in late August. The comment period closed near the end of September, but the document is still available on our website, as are the presentations that were used during the hearings and the testimony provided at the hearings themselves for those of you who are interested. And I can pop it into the chat later if you haven't had an opportunity yet. Areas on the left were areas where we found either beneficial or no adverse effects. And the areas on the right, we did find some potential adverse effects that need to be mitigated. And those mitigations are also described and discussed in the document. In the EA itself, the way this has been put together, the tolling alternative actually includes 7 different tolling scenarios, which together help to explore the full range of effects that could occur as a result of implementation of the Central Business District tolling program. Rather than go through all of that today, since I know a number of you probably have seen it, I wanted to at least give some of the key takeaways related to it. As we walk through the scenarios, there are several different parameters. You can see toll rates in there. You can see what we call crossing credits. Some of you may have heard of that. In certain scenarios, there are no crossing credits. In other scenarios, there are crossing credits given to vehicles that are traveling over the tunnels that enter into the CBD, which are already tolled. And in one of the scenarios, there are crossing credits given for those who also may have used the tolled bridges that enter into Manhattan. We also have different discounts or potential exemptions for different types of vehicles, like buses, or specifically transit buses, or taxis or FHVs. And again, each of them was modeled, so we have an understanding of how these different groups are affected and what happens when you give crossing credits or when you give discounts or exemptions to the toll rate itself and then to the traffic as a result of that toll rate. So the key takeaways are here. What we found across all 7 scenarios, tolling the Manhattan Central Business District reduced traffic entering the Manhattan CBD. No surprise, that's what we're trying to do. And there was a net benefit in congestion reduction across the region. When we offer discounts, crossing credits, or exemptions in the model, we end up with higher toll rates. Again, because we both have to reduce congestion and raise the revenue sufficient to fund $15 billion for the MTA capital program. So as you give more away, those who are still paying have to pay a little bit more to make up for that. Those higher toll rates lead to a greater degree of traffic reduction in the Manhattan Central Business District, but they also lead to increased traffic diversions, including increases across the Cross Bronx Expressway and Staten Island Expressway, as well as several other arterial highways. And then the crossing credits. The crossing credits are interesting. They lead to, and I'm sure many of you have heard about this for many years, there have been discussions about trying to more equalize the tolls in our region. We have different agencies that are responsible for those tolls, and we don't have the same toll rates, we don't toll in the same directions. Crossing credits do provide more parity in total costs among different routes. They also help to balance out some of that traffic that's coming across the untolled bridges across the East River. But those same crossing credits also change the balance of the effects on traffic. There's less effect when we have the crossing credits in reducing traffic from Queens, and much less effect reducing traffic from New Jersey. There's greater effect in reducing traffic from north of 60th Street in Brooklyn, and there's more traffic that develops at the Queens Midtown Tunnel and the Hugh Carey Tunnel, as well as on the Long Island Expressway when we institute crossing credits. So for today, and for those who are interested on in the presentations used for the hearings, we walk through all of the different effects that are seen through the EA. So you can certainly see that online or see it in the document. For today, I thought it would be helpful, given the nature of today's discussion, to specifically talk a little bit about the transportation effects. So as I mentioned, regional traffic, we see a reduction. Obviously, CBD is where we see the largest effect. That's what it's aiming to do. That's the goal. And that effect ranges from a reduction of just over 9% to just over 7%. So it's a hefty reduction in daily VMT. We also see vehicle reductions of roughly 15 to 20% in vehicles entering the CBD. Across New York City, we see reductions of about 1.5% to just under 1%. And then you can see the rest as well. Again, when you put it all together and net it out, there's an overall benefit for the region. On the highways, most of the locations do experience decreases in congestion, though we did find several areas that have increases at certain times of day, as you can see here on the left. And we do have mitigation built in terms of both monitoring and then using both transportation demand management measures and also potential adjustments to the toll structure if necessary. Local intersections, we examined over 100 intersections at multiple times of the day. In 3 of the 7 scenarios, 4 of those intersections did have increased delay at certain times of the day. And we would work very closely with New York City Department of Transportation as part of their normal practice on balancing traffic and signal timing to adjust the signal timing as necessary. Finally, on transit, in fact, we heard fairly frequently from the comments and oral testimony, what kind of impact is this going to have on transit? Because some trips just aren't taken, but some trips, and that's what we're hoping for, actually move on to transit. Across the entire network, That includes not just MTA's network, but New Jersey and out on Long Island and up in Westchester, among others. There would be increase in transit ridership of about 1 to 2% system-wide for travel to and from the CBD. But when we looked for adverse effects, we actually had to go all the way down to station elements. There were no adverse effects at the stations themselves. There were no effects on any of the lines, subway, bus, or rail. In all of those cases, it was found that there was sufficient capacity to address those increases. But in a couple of locations, we did find station elements, notably some stairs and escalators that might have effects under certain scenarios. So for each of those areas, we would start with a monitoring plan to make sure, are we really seeing those effects? And if there are adverse effects, we have mitigation, everything from just speeding up escalators a little bit to potentially removing handrails and adjusting risers to bring things up to code for a slightly larger volume, to potentially redoing stairwells or doing wayfinding, depending upon the location. Of note, because this is a regional forum, one of those locations that I mentioned is in Hoboken Terminal. It's under 2 of the scenarios where there would be an adverse effect on a particular stairway out in Hoboken Terminal. And we've been in touch with both New Jersey Transit and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey on the potential mitigation for that. So as part of our process, I mentioned earlier, we had to do a robust sort of outreach. We did early outreach last year where we had 10 public outreach meetings, 9 environmental justice outreach meetings. We also developed an environmental justice technical advisory group. This is a group of individuals from all 3 states who work in the area. They're experts in environmental justice issues. We also wanted to offer people who were interested, who self-identify as part of an environmental justice community or population, the opportunity to have more meaningful engagement beyond the webinar. So we also created a stakeholder working group. And during the public outreach and EJ outreach meetings, we let people know that this was available and to please nominate themselves or others for it. And so we pulled together as well several meetings of this stakeholder working group. For the EJ Technical Advisory Group and EJ Stakeholder Working Group, they were smaller meetings with members of each of those groups where we walked through some of the early findings and some of the early data, and then modified and sort of listened to them and gave additional information at each of the subsequent meetings, as well as modified our approach in certain cases, which I'll come to in a minute. During that early enhanced outreach, we had over 1,000 registered participants. We had nearly 400 speakers. It's not really to date anymore. It was more a little bit earlier this year. We took the numbers. There had been 14,000 views of the various meetings that were all, and they are still all posted online as well. And we received over 7,300 submissions at that point with comments and input from the public. Subsequently, after we released the document itself, we more formally held public hearings this time. In the first set in the public outreach meetings last year, we actually gave real-time feedback, so people could ask questions after the presentations through our chat function, and we had a team of us who were responding to those questions and queries in real time for them. At the public hearings, it was more of a standard public hearing where we sat and we listened, and they were very long. As I said, they are all up online if you'd like to look at them. I will warn you, I believe the longest one was over 9 hours straight. So you want to like pause it at different points and take breaks. We held 2 additional meetings of the EJ Technical Advisory Group, and we are on schedule to hold at least 1 more. And then we held another meeting of the EJ Stakeholder Working Group, as well as 2 additional agency meetings. I should mention in the early outreach, we also had agency meetings. In this most recent, we had over 1,800 people registered to participate, over 500 speakers. We had over 11,000 YouTube views, and that one is to date. And we've received thus far over 14,000 individual submissions. And when I say submission, each submission may have more than 1 comment. So that is many more comments beyond the submissions themselves. And then we also received 50,000 submissions in the form of form letters, where there were, for example, write-in campaigns, where everyone's statement looks very similar, but they're different people who were interested in at least making sure their voice was heard. Notably, we did extend our public review period from 30 to 45 days upon request. So I mentioned earlier that we did, during the early outreach, incorporate some of what we were hearing into EA itself. These are just a couple of examples. We made some modeling changes. Most notably, we had started with 6 scenarios. In fact, we talked at length about the 6 scenarios in the early outreach as part of our discussions with the environmental justice communities. They had raised real concern about the traffic diversions that were being seen, especially into the South Bronx. And as a result, we did some additional deep diving early on into that. We were asked very specifically, once we looked at the traffic, how much of that was trucks. And they raised their concerns that given the overburdened environment of the South Bronx, that one truck was really just too many. And was there any way to reduce the number of trucks coming through those diversions? So we added a 7th scenario. Did not take the trucks down to 0, but it did bring them down significantly at a particular location we looked at, McCombs Road. And so we put that in there as a 7th scenario to show what could be done, again, because we're trying to demonstrate the range of effects. We also added additional analysis related to taxis and for hire vehicles in tolling scenarios that tolled them more than once per day. This was, again, in part because of comments that we were hearing back from the environmental justice community, but also because we did find an adverse finding for tolling scenarios that tolled them more than once a day in terms of the potential impact on the drivers. So we did additional analysis that's in the EA in narrative form to show what happens in those scenarios if, in fact, we bring it down to tolling once per day or potentially exempt them from the toll. And finally, I shouldn't say finally, but as 2 other examples, we also modified and or added some mitigation and enhancement measures. We expanded the mitigation or enhancement at that point for adding air quality monitoring sites because we didn't find technically an adverse finding for air quality based on the national standards. However, we heard loud and clear this was of concern. So working with City Department of Transportation and Health, we will be broadening out the monitoring sites that are already in place and adding specific locations relative to this program. And we also have a provision in there for prioritizing the new electric buses for lines that are serving the South Bronx in particular. With that said, identification and evaluation of potential mitigation or enhancement measures is ongoing right now. Again, because through the public comment period, we heard about additional concerns that we're still now addressing. So where are we? So you can see here our schedule. We had our early public outreach. We prepared our EA. We notified the agencies, the organizations, and the public of the availability of the EA. We had the public review and comment period on it. And we're now in this area in orange with the star where we're determining whether the action polling result in significant effects. As part of this, we are doing some additional analysis or assessment as needed. Certain areas that rose during the public comment period for additional concern. We're also going through each and every one of those roughly 55,000 comments and then some. As I said, there's 14,000 submissions, so it's actually well over 20,000 or so comments. So it's actually more like 70,000 something comments. So we're currently going through each and every one of them. They all have to be responded to. And so we're developing the responses for all of those. As part of FHWA's decision, what they need to weigh in is the EA, the additional work that's been done on addressing any of the comments through analysis and assessment, all of the comments that we've put in place, and then do we have sufficient mitigation? So this is what's happening right now. We anticipate that once this is all completed, Federal Highway will issue a decision document. If the adverse effects are not significant or they can be mitigated below significant level, we would anticipate a finding of no significant impact or penalty. If there are significant effects that can't be mitigated, then we would anticipate that they'll be requiring an environmental impact statement. But we won't know that till we get to where we are currently and we can get to the point where they issue the decision document. Thank you. I see it.
Thank you, Allison. That was very informative, and based on the stats from your public outreach, it's clear that it was not an understatement when I said it garnered an awful lot of interest, and there'll be a lot of people tracking it, I'm sure. I'm wondering if there's anyone from the MAP forum who has any questions for Allison.
Sure, Debra, thank you. Allison, I know my colleagues time to time will criticize me for being a bit obtuse, but I wanted to understand better the crossing credits. And if you could just tell me a little bit from the perspective of the impacts to people who don't have a choice, going to the airport or traveling the I-95 corridor. We're forced to pass through that area. How would this plan and the crossing credits in particular impact that usage?
So the way the crossing credits would work, if you were to take one of the toll facilities and before you enter into the zone, you would be credited against the toll for the central business district, some portion of whatever you paid at the prior facility. Some of the tolling scenarios model that with what we call a higher crossing credit, which was a round trip on a TBTA facility, so roughly $13.10. Other ones credit at a lower amount, so roughly $13.20, roughly $6. So, and in each of those cases, what happens is, that may either deter or move some people to take a different alternative, whether that's transit, whether that's a taxi, whether that is some other form, or a friend gives them a ride, or carpooling. But in other cases, they continue to go through. So there would be cost increases. We do have in one of the chapters, in the chapter 4 section, there's actually a lengthy table and in the appendices that run through sample trips that might be taken from different locations throughout the 28 counties and what exactly the toll change would look like across each of the tolling scenarios. Importantly, right now, we don't have the actual toll structure. There's another process that still has to happen after the environmental assessment that includes our Traffic Mobility Review Board, which needs to, by statute, come up with what that ultimate toll structure might look like and recommend it to the MTA board.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other MAP forum member questions?
Yeah, hi.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Allison. Thank you for your presentation. Dave Barron from North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. Can you just say a little more? I noticed you talked about the effects on regional traffic, and in most of the areas you looked at, there was, I guess, a slight decrease was projected, and in New Jersey it showed flat or a very small increase. Can you say a little bit about? I mean, I don't know how detailed or of a look that was, but what factors lead to that, and can you talk about, like, at all within New Jersey where that traffic might be?
Yeah, we have, again, we have some maps in the document. I think it's chapter 4A is the regional traffic that shows that. There's also some maps in chapter 17 that specifically shows some VMT changes depending upon scenario, more specific for environmental justice communities. We do see some traffic increases along I-95, right? Not surprisingly. There are some additional traffic increases that we see leading into other locations. Out near the tunnels, you actually see some decreases in areas, right? Because people are not coming in, they're diverting around. Again, it depends on the scenario. Some of the tolling scenarios, there are crossing credits only at the tunnels. In other scenarios, there are no crossing credits. And then in one of the tolling scenarios, it includes the George Washington Bridge as well. Right now, we're doing some additional review and looking more closely at some of the environmental justice groups in areas where there might be some increases. But broadly, so again, as I said, so broadly, there's a general benefit. But if you want to see the specific locations, I would look at chapter 4A in the appendices, and they'll walk you through all of that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the MAP forum members? Gerry, do we have time?
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, please.
This is Devin from Connecticut Metropolitan Council of Governments, or MetroCog. Great presentation, first off. But I just wanted to know if you can speak a little bit to the analysis done, identifying some of the purposes of trips into the CBD.
Yeah, so the what we did was, broadly speaking, the base modeling that was used it's the BPM NYMTC BPM model was what was used initially. We did some looking at trips. In particular, we were asked to look at the distinctions between commuting trips and regular trips or non-commuting trips. We didn't go a lot deeper than that in specific types. We looked at sort of discretionary travel versus commuters versus non-discretionary, but not, if you're looking for purpose beyond that, like to go to the Broadway or to, for entertainment versus something else within the discretionary, that we didn't look into. But there is, with that said, there is a good amount of discussion in the chapters 5, which are the social demographics chapters, particularly 5A and 5B, and then also in chapter 6, which is the economic chapter, that does look at the different sectors that are affected or would be affected because of changes in trip patterns. And so some of that's captured there, not sort of directly, but in that sense of going through all the different job markets that are here and what would be affected based on the changes in travel.
Great, thank you, Allison. And I do think we have one question in the chat pod. Stephanie, could you read that question?
We sure do, yes. I hear the increase in train commuters from outside New York City in particular. Where do micro-mobility options fit in here? Has there been a review of potential increase in people on bikes, e-bikes, e-scooters coming into the CBD? What will that look like in terms of increased infrastructure within the CBD and at commuter train stations?
Good question. So we do have a chapter that looks at, it's in the chapter 4 suite on transportation. I want to say 4D, it's either 4D or E. One's parking and one is bicycles and pedestrians. On the bicycles and pedestrians, we found no adverse effects. There were some increases in bicyclists at the transit hubs. There were some pedestrian flow increases at transit hubs. The one location where we found some adverse effects was actually on the pedestrian side of things, and that was actually at Herald Square. There were 4 specific locations on sidewalk or crosswalks that would be affected, and for which we would address by removing some of the street furniture or moving some of the street furniture and possibly building out a little bit more space on one of them. But again, for bicyclists, we didn't see any adverse effects anywhere. But it is in there if you'd like to explore it. And I will put the link in afterwards so that people know where to go to find all the chapters.
Great, thank you, Allison. And clearly you've garnered interest here as well. So we appreciate you taking the time and giving us such a good update on this. And I'm sure we'll be following it as it continues. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do need to move along to our public participation piece of it. I'm going to hand it over to Gerry Bogacz.
Thanks, Deb. Yes, so we do have 2 registered speakers today who we are going to hear from before we move into the next agenda item. The first registered speaker is Murray Boughton, and Andrea or Fidel, could you unmute Murray's line?
It's been done. Murray? I'm on?
Yes, you are.
Hi, I got on a little late because I got things a little mixed up. The issue is, without a doubt, global warming. Everything is reflected on that. All the rules you make and all the regulations you make are all global warming related. A number of the issues that you follow are dictated by the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which was written 50 years ago for a world that doesn't exist anymore. There's a whole bunch of other regulations like the train horn that sounds at every station except if you're rich, then it doesn't sound because you have a quiet zone. We were at the Rockefeller Estate last night for a dance performance in Pecanico, and one of the issues they addressed was the fact that the Rockefeller Estate is on land that belonged to a particular Native American tribe years ago, and they thanked the tribe for permission to have their estate on land that originally was there. There is a recognition that the world has done some things that were probably considered correct at the time, but since that time we've learned and we don't do it that way anymore. So I'm in the business of confronting issues that were correct at the time they were written, but aren't valid today. The lines on the road are an example, a simple one, how everybody does what they want and they completely ignore the law and nobody corrects them. Now, you're all listening out there. Some of you know me for more years than I can possibly remember. That's because I recommended the ARC tunnel for the Route and Transportation Award, which New Jersey Transit got, which has now been renamed the Gateway Tunnel. I was briefed on the plans by the guy who designed them. There's some changes, but it's going to be built. At the time, they put a bulkhead under 34th Street that needed to come through when they built the Hudson Yards. They're expanding it now. I go back to the time when this was all happening. At that time, I could sit in a room with everybody. Can't do it now. We got to talk on this WebEx, which I have a lot of trouble using. Hey, Gerry, if I run over time, just cut me off or tell me to shut up. Gerry and I know each other for a long, long time, going back to John. I'm sorry, say it again.
No, that was.
Say
We have a line open. Sorry. Fidel, can you mute that line, please?
Oh, shoot.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Mary. I apologize for that.
I mean, you and I go back to when they designed the first meeting of the Tappan Zee Bridge, and we've been working together. It's not to say that we always agreed with each other, because we didn't. But you listen. A lot of people today don't even bother to listen. They write rules for the safety of the pedestrians, completely ignored. And somebody has to say, when you make lines for the public, when you do anything for the public, it has to be uniform across all of the states. That's stop tapping. Each state is making their own rules. It's a country where we travel. So how am I supposed to know what the local rule is in Pennsylvania because they thought they were smarter than everybody else? I spoke twice at the National Traffic Engineers meetings many years ago saying we need to have a uniform set of regulations. That was lost. I'm 89, going to be 90 in June. It's up to you and my grandson's generation to write rules that are relevant for today. The rules that were written 50 years ago don't work today. That manual that's being revised has to be junked and start from scratch with the rules that relate to global warming and how do we conserve and not waste resources unnecessarily. If you can increase safety everywhere, you reduce the number of times the police have to come or the tow truck has to come. It's a global issue. It's not a local issue. My job is to ask you and remind you it is your responsibility because you cover a lot of territory I can't reach. So think about what I say. Everything I say is on the record. And I have to tell the truth because I have no memory of what I said in the past. Everything I said If you look at my emails, it says, check it out. Don't trust me. Why should you trust me? But it's in a record. Everything I say, this conversation is in a record. Tuesday, I said many things at the MTA meetings. You can check them out. Time to change. I want to thank all of the people who took the time to help me learn and teach me. I'm not so smart that I figured this out myself. Many people have helped me. I thank them all. And thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Murray. It has been a long time, Murray. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Neil Weissman. Can you unmute Neil? I see that Neil has put a link in the chat bot also. Neil, can you hear us? We seem to have lost Neil. Can you, is that you, Neil?
I got you. Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Okay. I've posted a link to extended remarks in the chat, which I would encourage people to click on and look at while I'm speaking. I head up Complete George. It's a bike advocacy group. And today I will share our priorities for the upcoming New York legislative session, a proposal to connect New York City parks with grayways, and recommendations for the North Jersey active transportation plan. In the New York session, we will seek $60 million to widen the south path on the George Washington Bridge into a modern bikeway, either as part of the executive budget to grow tourism or the Environmental Bond Act to enhance access to green space. We will ask $3 million to fund a 1-mile bikeway along the Palisade Interstate Parkway so cyclists traveling between Harriman and Bear Mountain State Parks aren't turned around by the Palisade police. We want state traffic laws amended to allow cyclists to treat stoplights as stop signs so they can avoid getting hooked by trucks at intersections or hit from behind when bike lanes are blocked. And it would facilitate the creation of bike networks along secondary roads whose intersections are governed by stop signs. We would update Highway Law 331 to require complete streets upgrades on road resurfacing projects and funding to reduce municipalities' costs to implement bicycle master plans. In the New York City Council, we propose the DOT and parks designate 500 miles of recreational bikeways to connect city parks. Where current greenway proposals seek to upgrade arterial roads with protected bikeways and can cost billions of dollars in years to implement, the Grayways proposal would aggregate secondary roads, in the outer boroughs requiring little mitigation. For the North Jersey Active Transportation Plan, we advocate spending $3.5 million to restore the 8-mile Henry Hudson Drive along the Palisades to a state of good repair. The drive is a naturally occurring linear park and a premier destination for the region's cyclists. We advocate that mountain bike only trails be authorized in all preserves which currently have hikers only trails. We would clarify the legal status of e-bikes, anticipate their impact when designing bike grids, the potential for e-cargo bikes to replace trucks, and to consider subsidizing e-bike purchase to replace cars. We call for the enhanced reporting of crash data involving cyclists to understand the recent surge of fatalities and to affirm that cyclists actually do have the legal right to bike along shoulders. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Neil. And that link is in the chat pod, and we will make sure that the extended remarks are part of the record of this meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Those are the registered speakers for today. So I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Deb Nelson for the roundtable agenda item. Deb?
Great, thank you, Gerry, and thank you for your remarks, Neil and Murray. Our next agenda item is a roundtable discussion to talk about the impacts of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, which is signed into law 13 months ago. As Mitch mentioned in his remarks, it's a very exciting and important time in transportation with this new bill. And it really does enable quite a bit of significant new federal funding. And it also introduces a number of policy emphasis areas such as equity, climate change, resilience, housing, among many other things. And so as we grapple with, what this bill really means and how to implement it, I'd be really good to hear as part of this roundtable discussion from the MAP Forum members to really have you share your thoughts on the impacts of this groundbreaking legislation on both your organizations and your planning processes. And to start that off, I'd like to ask Gerry Bogacz to outline the anticipated impacts of IIJA from the NYMTC perspective. Gerry?
Thanks, Deb. So I'll be quick. Basically, from NYMTC's perspective, from the staff perspective anyway, it's kind of been like drinking from a fire hose because there's been a huge amount of information, very critical information coming out of USDOT. They've been moving very quickly to put all the very complex provisions of the IIJA into effect. And so we have been struggling a bit, but we have worked on distributing that information to our member agencies first and foremost, but also distributing relevant information to local municipalities. And in our region, that's a challenge. We have just over 200 municipalities just in our planning area, and the other MPOs and COGs probably face similar situations. We've been working closely with our state DOT on implementation coordination in terms of programs such as the Carbon Reduction Program and the PROTECT program, which do require state actions before funding is either made available or is fully available. We've also been establishing monitoring and tracking of the various formula programs and discretionary funding programs as the notices of funding opportunity come out to be able to share that information as widely as we can. And of course, there are new funding programs in this legislation. So integrating the formula funding programs has required prerequisites such as a safety action plan and the resilience improvement plan. And then we also are actively supporting the discretionary program applications that our members are submitting and indicating by written letter how those applications are relevant to the regional planning process. Our members have been rather aggressive in pursuing the discretionary programs. As of last count, we are over $300 million in awards for the NYMTC area in these discretionary programs. So it's been very, very active. Our members have been very, very active, but it's been a challenge, and it's not been without some information that's been overlooked because of the volume of information that is available. Deb, I think that's a summary from our perspective.
Great, thank you. Fidel, could you, do we have Mark Boughton, Commissioner Mark Boughton in as a panelist?
Deb, this is Mark Nielsen. I was just looking at the attendees. Commissioner Boughton is listed just as an attendee, not as a panelist.
Okay, Fidel, can you let Commissioner Mark Boughton in as a panelist? Okay. So what I'd like to do is to open the general discussion. First, to call on Commissioner Mark Boughton, who serves on the Connecticut Bipartisan Infrastructure Law Team. And Commissioner Boughton, we would like to have you provide your perspective on the impacts in Connecticut, if you would.
Sure, thank you. And it's great to be here. Appreciate all the hard work that everybody does on transportation issues in general throughout the year. We, as mentioned, have just rounded up the 1-year anniversary of the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And in Connecticut, as New York and New Jersey has as well, we've assigned a coordinator along with all the other states in our great country that are responsible for the implementation of the bill. For Connecticut, that's about $5 to $6 billion over the next 5 to 6 years. That's about $1.2 billion per year in increased funding we'll receive for our standard FHA programs and other programs. This is what we call plus-up money. For those people that are listening that might not sort of understand what I'm talking about, if we got $100 million in paving money for our state DOT, this year we got $140 million in new money. And so all that money is flowing through our regular programming that we have or projects that have currently been on the board. As mentioned by the other speaker, the exciting part about this is the competitive grant side of the equation. It's about $550 billion nationally, and we are working very hard in Connecticut, as is New Jersey and New York, out there trying to beat the bushes to get our municipalities to apply, to get the state to apply, and depending on the nature and the guidance of the grant. From a 50,000 foot level, my job in Connecticut is to be sort of the conductor. I make sure that each of our agencies are working together, that we're not duplicating services, that we're not getting siloed off or territorial about this, and that we're really working as a team. We've now expanded that attitude, particularly in New York and New Jersey. I want to commend Manelli and Richardson from both of those great states, who are also, we work great as a team, us three, and we're actually going to be in Washington, D.C. next week. So that's the good news. That I think the states have geared up. We're working closely with the National Governors Association. It's been wonderful to be able to get this money flowing. The challenge for us, as mentioned earlier, is that one, this is an incredibly guidance-heavy, regulatory-heavy grant program. This isn't like ARPA, where you just got to check. You actually have to go and compete for the money, or you've got to account for the money in a very, very detailed way. So the challenge is for a small town or a city or a small county, they may not have the resources to go after this money. They may not have the capacity to go after a grant. And such, they may just throw their hands up and say, the heck with it, I just don't have time for this. So part of what we do and what's being done in other states is we try to provide capacity for those through our COGS and through our MPOs and also through our Connecticut built team to be able to get them to apply. Safe Streets for All is a great example. That's a federal program that came out. It was due in September. The federal government expected about 2,400 applications nationwide, and they got 800. So they're not understanding why they're not getting these applications, and what has been good is they are listening. The White House is listening. Federal DOT is listening. That, look, this is just too complicated for folks, and again, they don't have the capacity. So that's the first problem. The second challenge will be, as we move into this deeper, is the local match that's required. Each city and town is required to provide between anywhere 10 and 20% of their own money. Well, as you know, the smaller the town, the more they struggle with $500,000, $1 million, particularly after their budget has been set. So you can't budget for a grant you don't know you got. You may not find out you got the grant until the middle of October, and now you need to come up with $1 million as your local match for the grant. That's a challenge as well, and we're all working on a solution for that in each of our states. So it's been exciting. This is a transformative program. I don't want to suggest that it's not, but it's not moving as quickly as a lot of us wanted to, including, frankly, from the White House down. So they've been great at listening. And I have to tell you, I've been in public service for over 30 years now, and this is the first time being a participant or consumer of a grant program that people are actually listening. And so the White House is retooling, they are revamping, they're working closely with us to the people that are on the ground to help us get this money deployed. So that's the good news. But I'm excited, and I think the big thing, the takeaway from here is those competitive grant programs are something that all of us should be looking at, be it at the state level or at the county level or even the local level. There's an opportunity here to change your community. So got good projects happening in Connecticut. Quickly, I'll just go over some of the dough that's already come through. We've got $32 million that's going into our airport in Connecticut. We're deploying $19 million worth of EV chargers. We've got $89 million already gone through. That's through the U.S. Army Corps, but still has been deployed here for ports and waterways. $76 million is being spent on clean water programs. $250 million are being spent on public transportation improvements. Where right now I just hopped off $100 million of dollars being spent on high-speed internet coverage, and $242 million is being spent on bridge replacement and improvement. You're not seeing a lot right now because a lot of this is a design phase. But once we get to the implementation phase of these programs, you're going to see scaffolding and cranes everywhere. So all good stuff, and certainly really important to move goods and services around our country and address issues of equity that have been longstanding.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's very helpful, very insightful. As you mentioned, we keep hearing words exciting and transformative. It's also really great to hear that that they're listening, because it is hard to figure out how to get this money through and to pass it through. And I'm sure that everybody wants to see it moving, but it is good to hear that they're listening. That's really important. We really appreciate your thoughts. We'd like to get thoughts and hear from our other MAP Forum colleagues. Some thoughts that you might want to consider in your remarks are, we're interested in knowing how are you monitoring and disseminating the information, how are you coordinating with the state DOTs, or are you taking steps in how to integrate these new formula programs such as the Safety Action Plan and Resilience Improvement Plan, and supporting the discretionary program applications. There's a lot of money there. And I think we can learn from one another on how to really try to get that into the right places. So I'd like to hear from any other MAP Forum members. You could just unmute yourself.
Yeah, Deb, this is Mark Nielsen and BCOG. I just wanted to follow up on the commissioner's remarks because we've been pretty active in my region to try to apply for some of the discretionary programs. And I think the approach Connecticut is doing with their build team has been really valuable, because it provides a mechanism where we can coordinate and it's sort of run ideas, pass ideas off to somebody, say, is this a good idea or is it a bad idea? And they've been very helpful in providing that back and forth on whether a project is something that makes sense to apply for or not. As the commissioner mentioned, with the Safe Streets for All, our approach was to do instead of having our 19 towns submit 19 individual applications, we chose to do a regional project. So we worked with our towns to say, look, you may not have a shot at getting the money if you apply individually, but if you come in as part of a region, we could, have a better opportunity to be awarded. And we did. We put together I think it's like close to a $22 million program of various safety improvements that we would implement throughout the region. So we'll see. I think it'll be a challenge if we actually get awarded, and we're not sure how we'd actually implement it, but that's a challenge that we're willing to take on if we do. But like I said, the approach with the coordination with the state has been very good. And as the commissioner said, there's so much complexity out there. We can't do it individually. We need that support from the state. So it's been a good, a good experience. And again, I just want to again thank the commissioner for taking the lead on this and being that coordinator, the herding of the cats, as it were, between all the cogs in Connecticut and the departments. So I think it's been a very good setup.
Thank you, Mark. That's a great perspective. Really, that's one of the key things we as MPOs or COGs are good at, is coordinating and collaborating. And it's really important in something like this as we're trying to get our heads around it. So I think that that's really a good point. Any other thoughts from folks? We'd love to hear from you, because this is how we're going to learn.
Yeah, Deb, I could say a few things.
Great, thanks, Dave.
Yeah, I think, in large part, similar experience to what Gerry was talking about initially, in terms of, regularly getting the word out to the members on our boards, our county and 2 city members specifically. And then, looking to them to help us get the word out to the 350, 60 something municipalities in our region. We've also looked to use the New Jersey State League of Municipalities to help us a little bit with that. We recently were at their conference. We had a booth, and while we were focused mostly on our programs that are available to municipalities, we did also explain how, we can be a resource for folks who are applying for IIJA funding. I was glad to hear Commissioner Boughton mention Richard Sun, New Jersey's IIJA coordinator, policy advisor to the governor. This bill has presented a great opportunity for us to work more closely with him and with the governor's office. We've met with him a couple of times. He came and spoke at our last board meeting to talk about what the state is doing to encourage coordination and to support applications. I think one of the really important things to give the context in New Jersey is that right now, what's really good in our region is, we see from, our long range plan that sets our policy that our board approved last fall, a little over a year ago, to the governor's office, to the administration in Washington. There's a real consistency in policy directives and directions. And I think that's really important, and it really helps. I am not surprised to hear the news about the less than expected number of applications that Commissioner Boughton mentioned. I do think there's just a bit of overwhelm at our level, at the county and municipal level. I think it's important to keep in mind that this is a multi-year bill, and there are going to be other rounds of this. I think initially everybody goes for sort of the bright, shiny new object. And I think it's important to think about the thing that you really need to do and then figure out what program it might work in, rather than responding just reflexively to each and every announcement. We are fortunate that we have a fairly long-standing monthly programming meeting with the 3 New Jersey MPOs and New Jersey DOT. That's allowed us to keep real close tabs on the new formulas and the changes and the increases in the existing formulas. So that's been beneficial. And as far as what we're doing with the discretionary grant programs, we ask whether it's one of our member counties or any of our municipalities. We're constantly putting out the message to please, if you're considering applying, to contact us, because we can write a letter of support. That letter can talk about how the proposal is consistent with our long range plan, can talk about how we would be able to program funding into the TIP should it be awarded. And we can also provide guidance. For instance, we were able to, working with a couple municipalities, we were able to help them steer their way towards the Connecting Communities grant program and to connect them with NJDOT so that they could go forward with that. Hopefully it's awarded. And I think that sort of covers the high level. I will say, one thing I should mention is the emphasis on safety, but that requirement that you have to have a local safety action plan in order to get implementation funds under Safe Streets and Roads for All. We are in our next work program for the upcoming fiscal year. We intend on working with any of our subregions that are interested to help them get one of those local safety action plans in place through a consultant effort. And I would thank Jeff Perlman and Lois Goldman of our staff for really pushing that initiative forward. We're hopeful that we can get those plans in place for our subregions so that they all are then eligible for the implementation funding under that program, because really, we're seeing across the board such an emphasis on safety. There's no higher priority. So that's one of the things that I think is very positive that has come out of IIJA, is because in the end, even if our subregions are not able to get that discretionary money, they still will have a local safety action plan in place with projects that are eligible for other funding sources, federal and otherwise. So that would be a really great development coming out of IIJA. So that's just a few thoughts off the top of my head. I hope that provides some insights for people.
Great, thank you, David. I'm hearing from Mitch, from Mark and Commissioner Boughton and yourself. It's also, the question keeps coming up, what can we do to help others to get this done. And I think that that's really important. And we do have a lot of work ahead of us to continue to be a resource to the communities and the member agencies. Are there any other MAP 4 members? We'd love to hear from you.
Deborah, can I just add on to Dave?
Sorry.
Sure. Yes, please.
Real quick, just to add on to David's comments, a challenge that our local municipalities are having is the pace and cadence of the NOFOs that are being dropped. For those of you out there that are experiencing frustration about that, I mean, you literally can get a NOFO on a Tuesday night with very little warning, with a due date of 2 weeks. And then Thursday morning, you'll get a notice of funding for something completely opposite on the other side of the spectrum. So you're trying to race around and read all the guidance and figure out where this plugs in. We are having conversations about what's a better way to do that? We figure out a way to give a nice runway to a warning, drop the NOFO on a specific date so that the teams are ready to look at it, give them some time to digest it, and then be able to make a determination about whether to apply. So that's a concern. Secondly, just understand that this is not a 1-year program. It's a 5 to 6 year program. So if you miss it this year, you'll certainly have an opportunity next year. There is money for study as well as implementation there. So even if you just apply for your safety study this year or next year to begin that process, they will pay for that. And that's really importantly. And then thirdly, you talked about what people can do to help. Look, we need manpower. I mean, nothing's going to get built, nothing's going to get designed, nothing's going to get engineered if we don't have engineers, construction folks, people out there that are able to put all this stuff together. And that is a real problem. It's a problem in Connecticut. We need about 550 new employees at DOT to be able to execute all this money. And it's a problem, I'm sure, in other states. So the fact that we can link arms and work closely with our community colleges, our VOTECs, our universities is going to be really important if we're really going to deploy this money the way it should be.
Deb, I just want to jump in there and second the commissioner's point there. It's great to have additional funding and new funding. That's wonderful. Funding can overwhelm the system sometimes, not only the planning process, but also like the commissioner said, you need to be able to actually put these, you need to be able to build the buses, to procure them, and you need to be able to build the roadway projects and so forth. So it's going to be interesting to watch that over the next several years, Commissioner.
Sure.
This is Becky Bradley from the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. And, we're a medium-sized region in Eastern Pennsylvania, as you know, and I mean, all of the challenges that Commissioner Boughton and Gerry just underscored and Dave outlined are very similar here. But it's even more poignant when you're a smaller MPO. We're not a small MPO, we're a medium-sized MPO, and we still struggle for resources, even with additional PL funds. We don't have the ability to hire third-party engineers to then go with safety action plans. But what we're trying to do is find a meet in the middle so we can help our communities unlock maybe 1 or 2 of these grants, because it's just not possible to be able to go after more than that, since they're looking to us as the MPO to be the applicant in most cases, but we're already stressed with resources as well. So we're trying to quickly update our own safety plan and then kind of do spin off small safety action plans for a couple of projects with identified issues in communities that we know would be great candidates for some of the discretionary funding. So it's been a situation where we've had to entirely change some of the order of when we were going to do things in our unified planning work program as an MPO. And so I think being able to be nimble, even regardless of the size or the resources that you have in your MPO, is something that we all have to work on. And then finding new and innovative solutions to rise to these great opportunity that we have now is just what our focus is going to have to be into the future. And we know that there's so many things that are very formulaic that we have to do as MPOs. And so I know we've had a great relationship with our USDOT Pennsylvania office and starting to have those discussions in reorganizing things to accomplish all of the goals, but then be able to meet some of the new opportunities, even if they are discretionary, that's coming out of the BIO.
Great, thank you, Becky. That's a very good perspective.
Debra, if I could.
Please.
Rick Dunn, NVCOG again. You know, one of the things that the comments just raised for me was the issue of the role of the MPOs. You know, we're largely planning agencies, and that's what we've been. The Connecticut MPOs as COGs tend to have an implementing agency role as well. And one of the things that I think most of us, the urban regions in Connecticut, are ready to sort of stand in the breach and implement projects for local municipalities, as opposed to just planning them and then letting them go their way. We're prepared to do that oversight and engineering work that we do for, frankly, federal aid eligible local roads in Connecticut right now. So, but I think everybody has that capacity. I assume everyone has that capacity to a greater or lesser extent. But as the commissioner said earlier, morning commissioner, the bigger problem is the local match and how we're going to pull that all together. You heard my deputy express some worry earlier that if we were awarded one of those larger grants, that he didn't know how we would pull it together. I'm counting on the state of Connecticut to step up if we win that award. But you know, we all need to be prepared to be implementing agencies, I think, to a certain extent, in order to advance these projects. Maybe different for NYMTC, but I think the smaller COGs and MPOs need to take on that role.
Thank you. Good point.
Just
David
real
Barron?
quickly, there was a question in the chat. It looks like it might have been sent to me privately, and I don't really see how I can respond directly to it. So I just want to say very quickly, the question was, how can I find out about the requirement for the local safety action plan? What is it? Is it a prerequisite to obtain federal funds? To get a detailed answer, you'll have to look at the Safe Streets for All notice, or the Safe Streets for All webpage that is through the Federal Highway Administration. But the basic thing is that that funding program can either fund development of a local safety action plan, or it can fund implementation of safety projects. You need to have the plan first. You can develop the plan without those discretionary funds, and that the notice or the webpage gives very specific information about what that plan needs to contain, and what support it needs from local officials and things like that. So I did just want to answer that question that was posted, because I didn't see a way to answer it via the chat or typing. So I just wanted to chime in on that.
Hey, Dave, it's Gerry. We found out one thing related to that. Sorry, Deb, I just wanted to jump in here quickly.
Oh.
And that is that if there's an MPO plan, that it does cover the local constituents as long as the projects that are being proposed are in the MPO plan. So we're actually like beefing up the safety section of our regional transportation plan to meet all the requirements of what's in the guidance for safety action plan. And then if that's acceptable to the federal agencies, then it'll theoretically cover our members to some extent. So it is better to have a more fine-grained local plan than a regional plan, but that is possible.
And that's good. No, thank you.
Right, and that may be something that others may want to look into, and we'd be more than happy to share that information with you. So
and
at
Lois
the
from our staff just posted the link in chat to the Safe Streets for All notice, and that goes into into great detail about all the requirements.
Thank you. Commissioner Boughton, would you like to say any other remarks before we move on to our next agenda item?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to say hello to a lot of old friends and new friends, and definitely the comments from Pennsylvania. I do meet with those folks out there and talk to them in the at the state capitol, and I'll share some of your concerns. I have some thoughts on what to do about the local match, but they're not fully baked yet. And I think it might be a model that other states, you know, if it doesn't require a lot of political will, might require a lot of discussion, but I think can sort of really assist and aid a local town that just doesn't have a process or the money to be able to go after this stuff. So I think there's more to be done. I'll share that with the folks from Pennsylvania as well, because we do talk once in a while about a lot of these issues. And we meet all the time. In fact, I'll be in Washington next week with all of the state coordinators for the entire program. And I know this will be a subject of discussion. If I have anything important to pass along, I'll contact you.
Well, thank you so much. And I think that this roundtable was very insightful, and I think it's very important. And we're so fortunate to have an organization like the MAP Forum where we can share what we're learning as we're learning, and we can share approaches so that we can all be a lot smarter together about this. So really appreciate everyone's input on that. I think I would love to stay and have us talk for another hour on this, but we do have a time frame here. So I am going to turn it back over to Gerry for the next agenda item. And thank you all.
Great, and thank you. That was an excellent roundtable. So thank you to all who participated. My job is to get us to lunch at noon. And I will do that because I know I'm hungry, so I'm sure others are too. We have two active working groups we wanted to get updates from for the MAP Forum members, the Multi-State Freight Working Group and the Multi-State Resilience Working Group. And then I'm going to give a very quick overview of the Regional Waste Movement study that's under development. So let's start with Ann Strauss-Weeder and the Multi-State Freight Working Group. Ann, I believe you can take the screen.
Thank you, Gerry. Can everyone see the screen and hear me?
Yes, you're perfect.
Oh, that's always a great compliment. Thank you, Gerry. Let me just go to full screen mode. Well, supply chains and freight remain in the news. If it's not, where's my sofa? It's this week, and through action in Washington, the avoidance of a major rail disruption. So we have the Multi-State Freight Working Group. I just want to take a moment because we have over 100 people here today to let people know about this group, because we do hold workshops that are open to the public. The workshop, the working group is a forum for discussing key good movement issues and trends and conditions. And very importantly, and Deb touched on this, one of the major roles that we can do as MPOs and COGs is facilitate that collaboration, the coordination among freight planning initiatives and efforts along the 4 states. And by the way, some good news as we end the week. The Port of New York and New Jersey for the 3rd month in a row. We don't have the November stats yet, but at least from through October was not only the largest container port on the East Coast, it was also the largest port in North America from a container standpoint. And just to give you some idea, the green line is 2019. You can see all of the contortions in 2021 and 2020, and even the red line of 2022. But the important thing is to see how much higher that red line is than the original green line. And there is the probability of having almost 2 million more TEUs moving through this port, our port, by the end of the year. So that's an amazing thing to consider as we move forward. We thank everyone who participated in the 2 workshops that we held in 2022. In March, one on clean freight movement, and just recently one on effective practices for enhancing the commutation options for people who work at freight facilities. As was just noted, if we don't have the workers, we can't get the job done. And if those workers can't get from where they live to where they work, they're not going to take the job or be able to hold on to that job. I'll post this in the chat, but in case you would like to look at the presentations or view the recordings from the workshops, this is where you can do it. And again, I'll put that in the chat after I talk. And also on that page, on the Map Forum site, we have all of our other group efforts underway. The Freight Working Group will be meeting this afternoon to talk about our plans for the forthcoming year. I'm just going to put up on the screen, nothing is set in stone, 2 potential workshops for 2023. Truck parking remains a critical issue, not just in our region, but nationally. We've talked about and identified 4 different types of truck parking issues. One relates to hours of service. The second relates to staging for either picking up or dropping off at ports, at freight facilities. The third is emergency truck parking. When something requires the truck drivers to get off the road and they cannot be accommodated at freight facilities. And we found a number of very interesting practices and applicable practices in a number of the states in the Map Forum region. So we'll continue that conversation in 2023 to see how we can advance it and really take care of this situation. In terms of an emerging positive situation, we are seeing a real push forward with offshore wind and the development of new facilities in at least 3 of the 4 states, and parts coming from all the states in the Map Forum region. The offshore wind considerations will be noted in the New Jersey State Freight Plan. Federal funds have been allocated to a number of the states. I know Connecticut and New York, and I believe New Jersey also received funds related to it. New Jersey is investing in a brand new port in Salem. But we'll be talking about what does this all mean and what do we have to think about as MPOs in terms of freight movement and economic opportunities. So with that, Gerry, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Ann, and thank you for everything you've done to keep this group dealing with the key issues. And yes, we will talk at 1 o'clock about upcoming. Looking forward to that. So the other working group that we're going to hear a report from is the Multi-State Resiliency Working Group, which is co-chaired by Megan Sloan of MetroCog in Connecticut and Manish Shah of NYMTC. So Megan, you've made it. Are you going to speak first?
Yep, I can provide a brief overview of some of our activities. And first, I'd just like to thank Manish for stepping in as co-chair. You have really made a big difference in workload and everything, so thank you. So I'll start with the July meeting. We had the Suffolk County Resilience Study presented and the Long Island Sound Study, Sustainable and Resilient Communities. And then in November, we had a great presentation from Cambridge Systematics regarding vulnerability assessments and data sources. And I think that is going to be of value for a lot of members with the Protect funding coming up. Our next meeting is planned for sometime in early February, and we are going to provide an overview of some of the data collected through the post-Sandy resilience study. And I think that's probably going to be the theme going forward for the next year. Manish?
Yeah, thank you. I have nothing to add on it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks to both of you. And Manish, thank you for stepping in as the co-chair. I only twisted your arm a little bit, but
You're welcome.
you're doing a great job.
I'm learning as I go.
With Megan, right? That's great. So we don't really have time at this point for questions, but just know the Map Forum members should know that these working groups are very active. There's actually a third working group, the Metropolitan Mobility Network, that is partially Map Forum. The next meeting for that group will be in the spring, and we'll have more information shortly. I do want to talk finally about the multi-state study that's being developed, the next one, which is the regional waste movement study. Thank you, Yinka, for bringing that up. I'm going to do this very quickly. I just want to indicate that this has emerged not only from NYMTC's regional planning process, but also from the Map Forum process. There are a number of areas around this multi-state region where waste movement has become a critical issue for various reasons, and it makes a lot of sense to do this multi-state regional look at waste movement at this point in time. Yinka, I'm going to move through this quickly. So next slide, please. The area of the study is the entire map forum area, basically. That's our initial target. That may get adjusted as we get into the study, but for now, we have the 10 constituent MPOs and COGs, the planning areas. That will be the initial target for the study area. Next slide. The organizational structure is, this is a NYMTC funded study, so NYMTC's freight subcommittee, the freight subcommittee of NYMTC's Program Finance Administration Committee will be the study steering committee and will be responsible for the federal funding. But very importantly, there'll be a technical advisory committee that'll be developed by the steering committee, but will include the map forum members. And so the map forum is a very important part of this effort. And there will be a schedule of quarterly meetings developed by both the steering committee and for the TAC. Next slide. These tasks I'll go through very quickly, but you'll see the general direction of the study from the task descriptions. So task 1 will simply be preparing informational materials about the effort. Task 2 will be developing the outreach program. Both of these are very important. Next slide. Task 3 will, Yinka, next slide. Thank you. We'll undertake agency interviews. So these will be interviews of MPO and COG staff and member agencies, as well as other identified agencies. And we'll be identifying relevant plans, related sections of plans, programs, and studies, and the findings and results of the interviews will be summarized for consideration. Key thing here is that we understand that there are many efforts, multidisciplinary efforts in some cases, that have been undertaken for waste movement, and we want to be cognizant of those. This is not meant to supersede anything that's happened before, but rather to build on it. Next slide. There will be a literature review and also a review of legislation and regulations. And again, that's not only transportation, that could be other types of regulations that govern waste, how it moves, where it goes, and how it's handled. Next slide. And then there'll be an establishment of key study parameters and existing conditions. So that would be the current systems and districts, permitted disposal sites and capacities and receiving sites and capacities, transload facilities and yards and so forth, defining the current waste streams and waste movements by mode, and presenting the information geospatially in a user-friendly format. Next slide. And we will be looking at the life cycles and anticipated replacements and expansions of the sites and facilities identified in Task 5. That's extremely important as we look into the longer term. And that information will supplement the geospatial data. And forecasting the remaining life cycles of waste receiving and disposal locations and anticipated replacements or expansion is also very important. There'll be a 2035 intermediate horizon, and then our current regional transportation plan horizon year is 2050. So that'll be the long range horizon. Next slide. 2 more tasks to cover. There will be an attempt to forecast waste generation and movement, which will involve the development of some type of a forecasting methodology for both of those in the longer term. There'll be a lot of inputs from NYMTC and the member MPOs and COGs in terms of putting together those forecasts. But the idea here is to forecast waste stream volumes and waste movements by mode, as well as the anticipated impacts of carbon reduction and waste stream reduction policies on future forecasts. And again, that'll be done for the 2 horizon years, the intermediate and the long range. Next slide and final slide. And then the result, identifying future opportunities and recommendations for utilization of different modes, capacities and development of supporting facilities and infrastructure, and then anticipated decarbonization and waste reduction policies. So this will be a 10,000 foot or 15,000 foot look, and hopefully it'll provide some context. It is obviously focused on movement and transportation, but the area of waste involves lots of other policy areas, so they'll be brought in as necessary in undertaking this work. So we thank the members of the map forum who helped us to develop this scope, and our current intention is to hopefully get this underway by the 3rd quarter of the next calendar year 2023. With that, since we're almost at time, I'm going to turn it back to Deb Nelson for her benediction. Deb?
Thank you, Gerry, and thank you all for all your participation. As we've said many times, this is an exciting and important and transformational time with this new transportation bill. And now more than ever, it's really important that we do the continuing comprehensive and cooperative planning process that is basically the foundation of what the MPOs do. I think we have a lot to learn from one another, and I look forward to continuing to hear from folks where we can share our lessons learned and support one another. And with that, it is 12:00, so I thank you all for your participation and have a great day and a great weekend. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.